Namaskar and welcome to Sansad Television. I am Vishal Dahiya and you're watching our show Perspective, where we bring you detailed analysis of key national and international issues. Today we're going to talk about the significance and impact of US President Joe Biden's visit to Ukraine. Now, in a major show of support for Ukraine, US President Joe Biden made an unprecedented trip to Kiev on Monday, his first since Russia-Ukraine conflict began almost a year ago. During the visit, which lasted a few hours, he met his Ukrainian counterpart and announced new military assistance and sanctions against Russia as well. Later, at a press conference, Biden said the United States will back Ukraine in its fight against Russia for as long as it takes. Zelensky termed Biden's visit as most important in the whole history of Ukraine-U.S. relationship. After Biden's visit to Kiev, U.S. announced a new package of security assistance for Ukraine valued at approximately $450 million, which includes ammunition for howitzers and the Himars rocket system, Javelin missiles and air surveillance radars as well. U.S. will also provide Kiev with approximately $10 million in emergency assistance to maintain its energy infrastructure. A day after this visit, Russian President Vladimir Putin blamed Western countries for starting this war. In the State of the Nation address to the Federal Assembly on Tuesday, President Putin said Russia is not at war with the people of Ukraine, but they themselves have become hostages of the Kiev regime and its Western patrons as well. We will discuss and analyze all aspects of this visit, that is President Biden's visit to Kiev and its impact on the ongoing Russia-Ukraine conflict as well. For more on this, we're joined by a distinguished panel of experts. Let me first introduce them to you, beginning with, we're joined by Dr. Vivek Mishra, an ORF fellow who is with us here. Former Mr. Ashok Sajjanhar is also joining us, and Ms. Elizabeth Braw is also with us. She's a resident fellow, American Enterprise Institute in London. Welcome all of you to Sansad Television. I'll begin with you, Mr. Sajjanhar, and let's first start by asking, a simple but very important question here. Why now, as in the visit of US President Joe Biden? Of course, it is an important milestone in terms of 1 year of the Russia-Ukraine conflict. But President Biden didn't visit Ukraine's capital so far.
No, you're very right. And I think it's a very important question, Vishal. First of all, thank you for having me on your show. Very important question because, first, of course, the symbolism that it is very close to the first anniversary of the Russian aggression against Ukraine. The other important aspect that I think is that there have been so many discussions that have been going on. I think the manner in which Ukraine has been able to withstand the onslaught from Russia has been quite unprecedented. You would recall that when the attack initially took place on the 24th of February last year, Vishal, then both the United Kingdom and the US had offered asylum to President Volodymyr Zelensky, and he said, I want weapons, I don't want a ride. And no one really expected him to hang on, to stay there for more than a few days or a few weeks. But I think he has surprised everyone. Of course, Ukraine lost territory in the initial weeks and months, but starting late last year, Ukraine and President Volodymyr Zelensky has been able to go and get back, claw back quite a significant part of the territory that was lost to Russia. Of course, recently we have seen everyone has been expecting a spring offensive from Russia. And we've seen that there have been increasing attacks on the Ukrainian infrastructure, energy, water, power, etc. And also on residential apartments. We have seen how Russia has been able to take Solidar, how they have been able to surround Bakhmut. They have been launching offensives in Kharkiv, against Odessa, and so on and so forth. So I think this is a very, one could say, a defining moment and also a decisive moment, because this is the time that Ukraine has to stand strong, has to push back. And there have been so many discussions as to what is the nature of armaments that could be provided to Ukraine.
Okay.
So President Biden's visit to Kyiv at this moment is to show both to the Ukrainian president, to the people of Ukraine, also to the people of Europe, and send out a very clear message to Russia, to President Putin, that the United States stands firmly, and the NATO alliance stands firmly with Ukraine, and they are going to help Ukraine to whatever extent is possible, all the most sophisticated equipment, ammunition, etc. is going. So I think it is the timing is very appropriate, and it sends a very strong message, both symbolic as well as substantive, to Russia, and of course, I think also to back home in America. President Biden, because of the very polarized politics in Washington, also sending a message to his opponents and also to his supporters.
Okay, and it looks like to other allies of United States as well in Europe, because there are positive reactions as expected coming in from various European countries, including Germany. Japan has also announced aid to Ukraine there. But bringing in Elizabeth here, Elizabeth, what kind of situation does this bring in terms of this visit? And it's not only symbolic. As Mr. Sajjanar was also pointing out, $450 million worth of aid sanctioned for Ukraine by the United States, which includes various arms and ammunition as well. Countering that, the reaction coming in from President Putin in Russia, in his State of the Union address, clearly blaming Western countries for this war, which he's been pointing out time and again over the year, but also going a step further ahead and suspending the New START treaty as well.
That's right. That is the big news that has come out most recently from Moscow. The fact that Russia is suspending its participation. It's not leaving the New START, but it's suspending its participation, or it plans to do so. And that is really very troubling news. New START was really the only remaining treaty of any significant, only remaining disarmament treaty of any significance that was still working, and now it seems to be under threat as well. But we should remember, when it comes to Putin's situation, that it is quite perilous at the moment. So he has to try to deflect attention somehow from this war. We should remember that 1 year ago, when he launched it, he did so under the proviso that it would just take a short period of time. It was a special military operation, not a war, and it was a special military operation because he didn't feel that he could ask to a whole war, and a whole war would have needed the permission of the Duma. So it's officially a special military operation, but of course in reality it is war. So he has to show something as a result of this massive effort and sometimes sacrifice that the Russians have put into this war, and he doesn't have very much to show for it. And the fact that Kyiv is now safe enough for President Biden to visit really is not very good news for Russia. We should remember that early in the war, not even embassies were able to keep going in Kyiv. As for European embassies, Poland and the Vatican, which is only partly European, they were the only ones to keep their ambassador in the city. Now embassies are back, and indeed Kyiv is so safe that all kinds of leaders, including now President Biden, can visit. So that really sends a message that or illustrates that this war is not exactly going Russia's way, even though Russia has been making recent gains in recent weeks. So it's not all bad news for the Russians, but not as good as one would have, as Putin clearly expected when he launched the war a year ago.
Okay, indeed, there are other leaders also who visited Kiev in the recent past. Just a few weeks back, it was British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak who was there in Kiev, holding dialogue with President Zelensky. Also, let me bring in Professor Mishra. Professor Mishra, this entire situation, this visit has triggered another round of allegations, counter-allegations between Russia and United States. Support for Ukraine from the Western countries in terms of aid, arms, ammunition as well. Russia, on the other hand, expressing its intention to suspend the New START treaty, which is very significant, as Elizabeth was pointing out. Is this, the escalation has gone to the next level?
Well, my doubts are there. It's a great moment of Western solidarity that we have today. Biden being the second president to have done this in modern history, going to a war zone. It's a great moment of symbolism, of course, for Western solidarity. But the question beyond that is the one you asked, is what does it leave for ending the war? And I think precisely coming on the heels of Biden's visit, the State of the Nation speech doesn't really leave much hope. And I think given the personality that Putin has, nuclear is not the best option for the world to deal with. I mean, the rest of the world can get together on the table. For example, Olaf Scholz is coming to India, and probably India and Germany will compare notes on how to end this war. But does it really, how will it be able to impact the war on the ground? Of course, Russia is massively slowed down because of the losses that it has suffered. But eventually, the end of the war is really not in sight. And I think that's a question that we should all be worried about. The other point that I wanted to make is, beyond the symbolism, is that the Biden administration's message back home for 2024 election. I mean, it's a great pitch for Biden presidency. For at his age, which is beyond 80, to be able to do this is a great message back home. But really, what it does to the war is a question that really haunts me in terms of ending the prospects of war. And given the two speeches, and Biden will be speaking in Poland, it doesn't really leave much hope at my end.
Okay. Mr. Sajjanar, both sides seems to have dug in deeper throughout this year. We've seen various developments happening, visits of European leaders, and now President Biden also landing in Kyiv. But if we go back to the Russian president's statement in his address, in the Federal Assembly, at one point he says that Russia was all willing to talk, have a dialogue, but the Western powers, the European nations, including the United States, also were not honest about that offer, were not honest about talks. That, of course, is a claim which has been made by Russia time and again. But at this point, President Putin making this statement, is it sort of a veiled message, that yes, there is still a room, small room perhaps, for dialogue and diplomacy?
I think, Vishal, President Putin Russia realizes that ultimately the war will have to end, and there will have to be discussions, there'll have to be dialogue, the diplomacy will have to play its part. But I don't think that time has come as yet. You have said very correctly that, President Putin has been saying this, that we have been willing to talk. But if you go back to the months before the war started, before the launch of the offensive on the 24th of February, I think it was America which was saying all the time that Russia is preparing to launch an offensive against Ukraine. And Russia continued to say, at different levels, including President Putin, the Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, and all the others, that no, we are not, these are just exercises that we are engaging in on the eastern side of Ukraine and on the northern side of Ukraine, along with Belarus. They refused, and they said that, what America is saying at this moment, that Russia is going to attack, is something like, the charges of WMD in Iraq earlier. And this is, boy crying wolf, while nothing of that sort is going to happen. And these statements were made time and again, over and over again by Russia. But then we saw what happened both on the 22nd, first in terms of declaring the annexation of the Donbass, the Donetsk and the Luhansk People's Republics, and then launching the offensive on the 24th. So I think this is again to justify the position. There might have been some argument earlier that, it was the expansion of the NATO that was a problem. But I don't think that this argument holds much water, that Russia was prepared to, willing to negotiate, and the West was not willing to do that. That being what it is, I think today the situation is quite different on the ground, something that President Putin would not have bargained for. I think both the sides have really dug in, and both the sides, even Ukraine, after the initial losses, has been able to take back a considerable amount of the territory. So this is coming to be a stalemate, looking like a stalemate, looking like some sort of a frozen conflict. I don't think either of the two sides is tired or fatigued. And possibly the war will continue in this fashion, some gains here, some gains to the other side for quite some time. But some sort of an escalation is definitely on the cards, because Ukraine is also getting its weaponry and equipment from the West. But Russia is also, it has mobilized and it has been reported that maybe 300,000 more troops, conscripts, are going to come into play, and so there's going to be escalation from that side.
Okay, okay. Elizabeth, as all of us are witnessing, and all three of you are also pointing out, we're seeing how Russia and the United States are hardening their stance with every move. President Biden's visit, then Russia's response on that particular visit. But another analysis which has always come about is that the longer the war continues, the other players in this conflict, between Russia and Ukraine, that is the European nations which have been backing Ukraine so far, the longer it continues, the harder it becomes for them to continue, the less tenable it is for them. So is there that also a very important aspect as well? And all these nations have their own domestic issues and domestic policies also to deal with.
That's right. And that is why European leaders are so keen for this war to end quickly, which is also the reason that they are trying to send as much equipment as possible. Many countries have already sent what they can spare from their own stocks, and now they are trying to add newly manufactured weaponry. But the most important item at the moment, I think everybody knows, is ammunition. But the point is, I think that the longer the war goes on, the more people in all kinds of countries will start feeling about that, well, or maybe it's not worth the effort. Why are we spending all this money? And why are we spending all this effort when it's, as your other guest just said, if it's going to be a frozen war, then why are we doing this amount? Why are we expending this amount of effort? And that is especially the case in the United States, where we have some Trumpian Republicans and some people on the far left in Congress who have been making this case all along, and now they feel that their case is being strengthened, which is, of course, another reason why Biden went to Kyiv, to show that all this American money, all this American weaponry has been made a difference, has been worth something. In Europe, it will be interesting to see to the extent to which the Ukraine war is reflected or plays a role in upcoming elections, of which there are some this year, for example, in Finland in April. Now, Finland used to take a very subdued stance vis-a-vis Russia, because it has a long border with Russia, and Finns are very patriotic and keen to resist Russia. But of course, Finland has always been keen not to provoke Russia as well. But we've seen in recent months, in fact, since the year started, the Finns are much more willing to speak out against this war and to say we'll support you for as long as it takes. And that is another interesting aspect of this war, that it has brought out this willingness to a larger extent than Putin clearly calculated, this willingness among European countries, both politicians and citizens, to support Ukraine. And then one last point about the citizens is that many, countless millions of European citizens at the moment are hosting Ukrainian refugees. And obviously, lots of people have been trying to help. And most of these refugees have gone to Poland, Germany, and indeed many to Sweden as well. But it's one thing hosting refugees for a few weeks, quite another to host them for months or indeed a year. So that's something that I think politicians are having to bear in mind as well. Not just I think, they are having to bear it in mind, because that good Samaritanship will inevitably ebb a bit as the weeks and months go on, and that's unfortunately the reality of any sort of hospitality.
Indeed. Dr. Mishra, your views on the way forward from here onwards, given the fact that the hostilities are increasing, going by the kind of statements which we hear from both sides, but there, as Elizabeth was also elaborating, When we look at the other important major players in this conflict, there seems to be, the fatigue, the conflict fatigue or the war fatigue already seems to be setting in.
Absolutely. I think one of the reasons that Biden administration's Biden's visit to Ukraine did was to lift up the spirit of the European allies. And I think to that extent, it has really been successful. But in terms of fatigue, definitely both sides are drawn long. And I think there was a point in time in a few months back when we were apprehensive about whether Europe will stand up to the winter. The winter is coming narrative was setting up. But definitely they've seen the winter through. Supply chains have been, reconstructed. Scandinavia, for instance, is supplying major fuel and gas to Europe. Whether that is sustainable or that kind of supply chain is sustainable, and we are entering a new setup of trade or a new alignment altogether in this new world order that will be left after this war ends either way, is a question that really is open-ended. So I think, to my mind, whether we have talked about the worst is still to come or not, I think we should wait with bated breath about the end of the war with crossed fingers, because as Russia is left with lesser and lesser options, which it is clearly, their chances of the war may get more dangerous. Okay. And I think that is one question that we should all be worried about.
Okay. Mr. Sajjanar, final word from you. You earlier pointed out that, yes, there is always a room for dialogue and diplomacy, but that time seems to have not come as of now. And that's clearly visible as well, given the way, both sides are trying to marshal their forces, support as well, and, the morale booster statements or visits coming in from both sides. So when we look at the, short-term horizon and the long-term horizon as well, one, how bitter the escalation of conflict can be, and two, when we are looking at dialogue and diplomacy, there is a light at the end of the tunnel, but are both sides able to see it?
Okay, to your last question first, I don't think either of the side is willing to see it at the moment. It will have to come. I think all wars, whether it's First World War, Second World War, the Vietnam conflict, they must continued for whatever, 20 years or so. Even the U.S. presence in Afghanistan, they all end. They have to end. They end through talks. They end through negotiations. They end through dialogue. But this is not the time, because I think both the sides are arming themselves and, going forward. One point, if I could make, Vishalji, is this. I've been to a number of countries in Europe very recently. Now, there has been all this problem of shortages of fuel, of food, inflation, supply chain disruptions, etc. So there are protests, there are demonstrations. But, when I speak to the people there, they all say that they are standing strong in support of Ukraine, and they'll continue to stand strong. So, one of the messages of President Biden's visit also was, the message that he gave to President Putin, that Putin had thought that this support for Ukraine is going to decline, is going to wither away. That has not happened. And I think the presence of President Biden was a strong affirmation of that. But coming to your the first question that you had posed in terms of what does the future hold, as I said, far in the distant, of course, there have to be negotiations. The time doesn't seem to have come right now. There might be possibilities of some small negotiations, like the ones that we saw Turkey holding negotiations about the export of food and fertilizers, both from Russia and Ukraine, how India was also able to chip in terms of this particular, some of these small positive movements forward. But I think overall, in terms of the war coming to an end through diplomacy and dialogue, I don't see it right now. One last comment, President Putin is likely to be in India twice over the next few months, once in June for the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit, and then in September for the G20 Summit. Let us see if there are some possibility, if there are some backroom channel discussions and something can be worked out around that time.
Okay, indeed, there it is. Thank you so much, Ambassador Sajanhar, Elizabeth Braw out there, and Dr. Mishra also for sharing your valuable inputs and insights with us and our viewers also. So as our experts were pointing out, as of now, it looks like the escalation is building up and it is going up to the next level with both sides, specifically United States and Russia, digging in their heels as far as this conflict of Ukraine and Russia is concerned. Although there is always a room for diplomacy and dialogue, as our panelists were pointing out, we'll have to wait and watch, and we'll keep close watch on all the developments, keep on bringing you all the detailed analysis also on this and several other issues. Till then, keep watching Sansad Television. Thank you.